You know what's funny? When you finally stop chasing someone who's been stringing you along, they don't clap for your strength, they panic. Today, I want to talk about the final dirty move avoidants use when they realize they've lost control of you. It's not a grand gesture. It's not an apology. It's not even closure. It's the hook. That manipulative, subtle move they make to reel you back in. Not because they love you, but because they loved being in control. They'll send a late night "I miss you." They'll like your story after weeks of silence. They'll casually show up in your orbit, just enough to get in your head again. See, avoidants don't fear losing you. They fear losing their power over you. They thrive in ambiguity. They crave the upper hand. But when you get clarity, when you draw a line, they get desperate. And that's when they play their final card. It's not love, it's bait. And the second you bite, they're gone again until they need another ego boost. So here's the truth. When someone has spent their time avoiding vulnerability, accountability, and real connection, the only thing they'll chase is control. Your job isn't to decode their breadcrumbs. It's to walk past them and never look back. Because freedom doesn't come when they finally chase you. It comes when you no longer care if they do. When someone with avoidant tendencies realizes they can no longer control you emotionally, it's not love or regret they feel. It's the sting of losing their grip. Avoidants are driven not by intimacy, but by the preservation of emotional distance. They're drawn to the illusion of connection, as long as they can keep it on their terms. So when you finally stop engaging, when you stop playing the role they counted on you to fill, whether that's chasing, fixing, or hoping, they don't miss you. They miss the dynamic where they held the cards. For an avoidant, control is safety. It's how they manage their own fears around vulnerability, dependency, and exposure. The relationship isn't about emotional reciprocity. It's a game of balance in which they feel secure only when they're one step ahead. They become accustomed to you being the one who reaches out, who tries harder, who waits. That pattern feeds their sense of power without requiring them to actually show up in a meaningful way. But when that rhythm breaks, when you pull away or finally demand more, they're thrown off center. What often follows isn't clarity or accountability, it's discomfort. Not because they realize they lost someone valuable, but because they lost control of how they were being seen and engaged. That control gave them a kind of quiet dominance. They could keep you close enough to satisfy their ego, but far enough to avoid true emotional risk. Your decision to step back, to stop playing the game, disrupts that system. It confronts them with something they've worked hard to avoid. The reality that they can't hold on to someone without ever offering real presence. At that point, their ego gets louder than their heart. They feel a need to restore the dynamic, not the relationship. They don't necessarily want to reconnect in a healthy way. They just don't want to feel discarded or powerless. The goal isn't love, it's balance on their terms. And that's why they might reach out in a way that feels nostalgic, vulnerable, or seemingly honest. But it's usually not about rebuilding something real. It's about reclaiming the emotional upper hand they lost when you stopped showing up the way you used to. I think sometimes what's difficult is that their discomfort can look a lot like longing. It can sound like regret. But beneath the words is a fear of no longer being able to influence how you feel. What they truly mourn is the end of their control, not the loss of a relationship they never really showed up for. The final move an avoidant makes when they feel you slipping away isn't dramatic. It's subtle, calculated, and designed to slip under your emotional radar. It's a hook, not to draw you into love, but to draw you back into confusion. When they sense their usual tactics no longer work, when you no longer react, chase, or question where you stand, they don't respond with honesty. Instead, they reach for manipulation disguised as vulnerability. This move might come as a casual message, a "hey, just thinking about you" out of nowhere, a song sent that reminds them of you, a photo liked at midnight after weeks of silence. To an outsider, it looks insignificant, but to you, someone who once cared deeply, It stirs emotion. That's the point. It's not a real attempt to reconnect. It's bait, carefully chosen to test the waters. They want to know if you'll bite. Not because they've decided to meet your needs, but because they need to know they still have access to you. Avoidants are uncomfortable with deep emotional responsibility, but they're very familiar with emotional control. The hook is their last resort to pull you back into the push-pull dynamic. It's not about offering clarity or commitment. It's about keeping the door cracked open just enough so they can slip back in if they choose, on their terms. They don't have to explain themselves or change. All they need is one little sign from you that says, I'm still affected by you. That's all the power they need to feel in control again. They often do it at a time when you're just starting to find peace, when your silence has become strength, when your emotional clarity has made space for self-worth. That's when the hook hits hardest, because it preys on your old hope. It makes you question if maybe, just maybe, this time is different. But it's not different. It's the same pattern with a different disguise. The intention isn't connection, it's disruption. They won't follow through. They won't suddenly become consistent or available. What they will do is vanish again once they've felt that flicker of reassurance that you still care. That's the cycle. That's the hook. And it's so effective because it mimics vulnerability without requiring accountability. It stirs feelings without opening resolution. It's not a door opening, it's a trap resetting. When they can't control you directly anymore, they try to control you emotionally. The hook is their way of staying relevant in your heart without ever stepping up in your life. When an avoidant makes that final move to pull you back in, it's easy to confuse it with love. The message sounds tender. The timing feels meaningful. Maybe they say they've been thinking about you, or they admit they miss you. In that moment, your heart leaps because you've waited so long for some kind of emotional clarity. But what you're actually witnessing isn't love. It's ego. Love requires vulnerability. It requires presence, consistency, and a willingness to grow through discomfort. Ego, on the other hand, operates from a place of preservation. It doesn't care about your healing. It cares about maintaining status, significance, and emotional leverage. So when an avoidant reaches out after a period of distance or silence, you have to ask, are they trying to repair something, or are they just trying to feel powerful again? The reality is many avoidants struggle to differentiate between connection and control. When they sense they've lost your attention, your emotional availability, or your investment, it hits their ego like a punch. Not because they suddenly realize how deeply they care for you, but because their internal narrative that they could leave you waiting and you'd always be there has been challenged. They don't want to rebuild the relationship. They want to rebuild their image in your mind. That's why they don't come back with changed behavior. They come back with just enough sweetness, just enough nostalgia to remind you of what you wanted them to be. This isn't about you. It's about them feeling in control again. They don't want to be the one who got left behind. They want to prove, mostly to themselves, that they still have access to you, that you're still emotionally tied to them, even if they've never truly earned that connection. When they sense your detachment, it bruises their self-image, so they act not out of love, but out of a need to reaffirm their importance. And here's where it gets dangerous. That kind of attention can feel flattering. It can feel like a turning point, but it's not backed by any willingness to do things differently. The energy behind it is reactive, not intentional. It's not love. It's damage control. The moment they feel their ego is soothed, the urgency disappears. The texts stop. The effort fades. And you're left feeling confused, maybe even blaming yourself for thinking there was more to it. But there wasn't. What you got wasn't a declaration of love. It was a reflex, a last-ditch attempt by the ego to reclaim its spot in your heart without ever earning it. One of the most deceptive patterns in dealing with avoidance is the way they offer breadcrumbs. Those small, inconsistent signs of interest or attention that keep you emotionally hooked without providing real substance. A breadcrumb could be a random message, a like on your social media, a vague compliment, or a fleeting moment of apparent vulnerability. It's never enough to build anything meaningful, but it's just enough to make you pause, wonder, and open the emotional door you worked so hard to close. That's exactly what makes it so dangerous. The trick lies in how easily these breadcrumbs can be romanticized. When you've been starved of consistency, the smallest gesture feels huge. A simple thinking of you text feels like a turning point. You start to imagine they've changed, that they've finally seen your value, that maybe this is the moment they step up. But it's not. It's just the same behavior in a different disguise. And the meaning you assign to it says more about your hope than their intention. Avoidants are skilled at giving just enough to keep you around. They know how to spark curiosity without offering commitment. And often, it's not even intentional manipulation, it's simply their pattern. They're uncomfortable with closeness, but they also don't want to lose the safety net of your presence. So they create emotional tension, push you away until you pull back, then drop a breadcrumb to see if you're still there. It's a cycle that keeps you in a state of waiting and wondering, always hoping for more, but never getting it. Romanticizing breadcrumbs turns a toxic dynamic into a fantasy. You start to believe these small moments mean something significant. You tell yourself they just need time, that they're scared, that their little efforts are signs of deeper feelings. But deep feelings aren't shown through inconsistent action. They're shown through consistency, communication, and emotional availability, none of which are delivered through breadcrumbs. What's hard to accept is that these gestures are often about control, not care. They're designed to re-engage your emotions just enough to keep you from moving on. Once you respond, once you open that door again, the avoidant feels reassured. They don't have to actually show up for the relationship. They just need to know they still live in your mind. That's the power they want to maintain. Seeing breadcrumbs for what they are means refusing to inflate them into something meaningful. It means holding your standards even when part of you wants to believe that tiny gesture holds weight, because love doesn't leave you guessing. And breadcrumbs are not a meal. The real breakthrough doesn't come when an avoidant finally decides to chase you. It comes when you no longer care if they do. Emotional freedom isn't about getting the apology, the closure, or the dramatic realization from the other person. It's about reaching a place within yourself where their behavior no longer dictates your self-worth or your emotional state. That shift, when their silence no longer feels like rejection and their breadcrumbs no longer feel like hope, is where your true power lives. When you've spent time invested in someone who gives you just enough to stay, but never enough to grow, your nervous system becomes wired around their inconsistency. You get used to waiting for the next message, the next gesture, the next moment of false clarity. And for a while, you believe that if they finally showed up, really showed up, it would heal the wound they created. But what actually heals you isn't them coming back. It's you moving forward. Emotional detachment doesn't mean you stop caring overnight. It means you start seeing the situation for what it really is, not what you hoped it would be. It means recognizing the difference between love and emotional survival. You stop measuring your worth by how someone else treats you. You stop making their inconsistency your responsibility to decode. And slowly, your peace becomes more important than their attention. This kind of freedom can feel unsettling at first. You've been wired to crave their presence even when it hurt. So when you no longer crave it, part of you wonders if you're becoming cold or bitter. But you're not. You're becoming clear. You're no longer available for manipulation disguised as affection. You're no longer willing to confuse emotional anxiety with passion. That's not bitterness. That's healing. What avoidants often don't expect is that the same silence they once used to control you eventually becomes your sanctuary. The space they created by pulling away becomes the place where you remember your power. And once you remember it, their final moves, those last-ditch attempts to re-engage you, don't land the same. They feel small, obvious, almost irrelevant, not because you don't remember how it felt to want them, but because you've outgrown the version of you who settled for so little. You no longer need them to come back to feel whole. You've rebuilt yourself in the silence they left behind. And when you reach that point, their attention, their absence, and their games lose all power because you've already won. You're free. So here's what it all comes down to. When someone avoids intimacy but thrives on control, they'll always find a way to test your emotional boundaries. And when they realize they can't control you anymore, their last move isn't about love, it's about power. Whether it's the late night texts, the vague check-ins, or the sudden, I miss you, that comes just as you're moving on, don't be fooled. These aren't signs of growth. They're signs of discomfort with your strength. The final dirty move is subtle because it has to be. If it were honest, it would come with accountability. If it were love, it would come with change. But it's neither. It's just a reaction to the loss of control. And once you understand that, you stop chasing meaning in their mixed signals. You stop shrinking your self-worth to fit their avoidance. You stop letting their inconsistency define your value. You don't need to decode silence. You don't need to chase clarity from someone who benefits from your confusion. You need to trust that walking away from breadcrumbs